Well, it's 7 p.m., so I want to welcome everybody to the first ever virtual Issachar Tuesday night. I want to thank you all for being flexible as we all kind of have to be during these times. Thank God for Wi-Fi. Thank God for internet that we could actually still have a meeting during these times. We've got an amazing night planned, but before we get into all of that, I want to just specifically thank you all for your support, whether that be with volunteer hours or your finances, or you're a mentor to one of our students, or even just being a part of this live. We literally couldn't, there would be no Issachar without you. We would not be able to, move forward what God has us doing in the city without you. So we want to give a special thank you to all of you for your partnership in whatever capacity that you partner. We want to say welcome to our students. Our students are all happy, healthy, healed, and free. So they're doing great, and they are joining us tonight on the call. So all of our apprentices, hello, miss seeing you in person, but in due time, we will see you. For those who don't know, my name is Anthony Cotton. I am a staff member here at Issachar, and I will be your host, your MC tonight, and just kind of keep things moving forward. And it's going to be a super great night. So a few housekeeping things. If you are on your computer and you hover over the bottom, a toolbar will come up and you can see a Q&A box there. About 8 o'clock, we're going to do Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the night, please write those down. And then when we go to Q&A, drop them in that Q&A box. And we're going to be answering your questions live here on Zoom and live on Facebook for those who are watching on Facebook. Also, if you look in the chat, and you scroll all the way to the top, there are names and websites of each of our panelists. So if you want to reach out to one of the panelists or find their information or their bio or more about what they do, just scroll to the top. You can find their website and you'll have more information on them. And also, we're going to be doing a post that has the same information and maybe a little more if you want to reach out to some of our panelists. So definitely be looking out for that. And last housekeeping thing, the bathroom is right to your left or to your right, or maybe behind you, depending on your house. So feel free to take a bathroom break if you need to do so, and then join us right back here. But anyway, I think that's all that I got. Let's just jump right in. I don't want to take too much time.
Anthony, I have a housekeeping question.
Okay.
Are we going to howl at 8 o'clock?
Is that a thing? I didn't know that was a thing.
You know that thing?
No.
It's a thing. It's a thing in my neighborhood at 8 o'clock. Hundreds of people are going outside and howling.
I might have heard that yesterday. I heard a lot of commotion outside, and I was just like,
I mean, we'll hear it. We'll hear it here because my neighbors are all doing it.
We might take a second to howl at 8 p.m. Thank you all
I think
for enlightening me to that.
Especially with a full moon. It's a full moon tonight.
We must howl. That's not even an option anymore. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. Yeah.
So everybody watching, be sure to be ready at 8 o'clock to give us your best howl. Because it's going to go down right here on Issachar Live.
Cool.
Okay, so let's jump right in. I don't want to take too much space. We've got an amazing panel tonight, and I want to introduce our panelists, and we'll go one at a time. And another thing, you can click on your screen speaker view or panel view. So if you want to see everybody at the same time, click panel view, and you'll be able to see all of the panelists. Otherwise, you'll be on speaker view, and it'll just show the person that's talking. Your preference, but panel view is pretty cool. Anyway, so Jeff, Mr. Howl at 8, we're going to start with you. Just tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about the work that you do.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Johnson. Delighted to be here with all of you tonight. I'm the executive director for Mile High Ministries, and I've been in that role for a long time, since 1988. I live on the east side in Denver with my family in a house we've lived in for a long time. I'm sitting tonight out in our camper. It's an old camper that actually some Issachar alumni and some other friends moved into our backyard and renovated for us, so it's my escape place in the backyard. We call it the Comet. And Mile High Ministries seeks God's peace for our city through the prayerful, creative, and compassionate development of people and places.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for kicking us off, Jeff. Amy, we're going to pass it to you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
You bet. I am Amy Jackson, not related to Sarah Jackson, who's also up here on the panel. I work with Jeff at Mile High Ministries. I'm the deputy director there, and I also am the director of one of our programs, Joshua Station, which is a long-term supportive housing program for homeless families that are transitioning out of homelessness. And I've been at Mile High for just about 5 years, and I live in Lakewood with my 2 dogs, who might be a little obnoxious tonight, so I'll apologize in advance. And yeah, that's, I guess, me.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for the work you all are doing. There's some pretty cool stuff going on over there from what I know. Sarah, can we pass it to you with the same 2 questions?
What were the questions? I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. Just tell us a little bit about who you are and the work that you do.
Okay, my name is Sarah Jackson, and I am the executive director of Casa de Paz. I am in my apartment right now, which is about 15 minutes away from the Immigrant Detention Center in Aurora. And so currently right now there are hundreds of men and women who are locked in immigrant prison. And these are folks who are asylum seekers or undocumented immigrants who've been living in the United States for a period of time and then were arrested by ICE. And what we do at Casa de Paz is, our mission is to reunite families separated by immigrant detention. And really what that boils down to is treating our neighbor the way that or loving our neighbor the way that we love ourselves and the way that we love our God. That's what we do.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Lewis, you look extremely prepared. I love the headset. I'm going to pass it over to you and just, again, tell us a little bit about who you are and the work that you do.
It's funny. Some people love it. Some people tease me. They say I look like I am answering calls for Verizon or something like that. This is my work setup. So my name is Lewis Brown. It's good to be with you all again. I am the Vice President of Partnerships for an organization called the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, or CALE, for 3 more days. And CALE is a collective impact network. We belong to a larger organization called the Strata Education Network. And basically, both companies work on behalf of non-traditional learners and workers, and are focused on helping improve the process, reduce barriers, and driving system change across the country to impact adult learners and workers. And so Friday is my last day, and then Monday I go to work for Zurich, Zurich Insurance, to lead their upskilling and reskilling effort for North America. So I'm excited about the transition, and everything that we're talking about today is very relevant.
Wow. I'll definitely have some questions about that transition a little bit later, but thank you for sharing. And then last but not least, we've got Scott Lundeen. Scott, I'll pass it off to you. You can introduce yourself and kind of kick off the night. Just want to say hi to a couple more people. Anthony, saw that you came on. Heather, Kevin, Sierra, welcome everybody. Super glad to see you all virtually. Scott, I'm gonna hand it off to you, and then I'll be back for Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch, Anthony. So iSSACHAR is about, my name's Scott Lundeen. I'm a alum of the iSSACHAR program, and then also the director. iSSACHAR Center cares about urban Christian leadership, and this is a season when leadership matters, and we're thinking a lot about it. Tuesday nights are a tradition from when I started at iSSACHAR in 2000, Jeff, that's been the tradition since the very beginning, is that we have a night where we're talking about what's happening in the world today, and then how do we lead as leaders and as Christians in that space. And so this just continues as a way of us continuing that tradition online in this unprecedented season. And so thanks everybody for joining us, and excited to be together today. Jeff and Amy, glad to be with you guys. Issachar, came out of Mile High Ministries, so we've had a long time of working together. Grateful to be thinking about leadership tonight with you guys. Sarah, we connected on a Zoom call for leaders in Denver last week, and kind of connected for the first time. I've been hearing about you for years and about Casa de Paz, and a lot of Issachar people and connections through the Issachar network have been involved at Casa de Paz. My daughters, but there's people all over the city have been impacted by your work, and are grateful for your work that you do in addition to a full-time day job. I'm still amazed at how you do all that.
I only work part-time.
Okay, yeah, gotcha. Yeah, it's still a lot. And Louis, we've worked together for a long time, and you've been connected in all kinds of different spaces around the city, around leadership, nonprofits, different communities, from church to nonprofit, business sectors, prison ministry kinds of things, music, and have partnered with Issachar over all this time too. So really grateful.
Plus, you guys jumped out of an airplane together, if I have the story.
Yeah.
Yes, God is the man. If you guys don't know, he skydove. That's not the word, skydived.
I don't even know what it is. One of those, yeah.
Maybe you did skydove the way it
That was Lewis's birthday. That was pretty awesome. But it seems like this is also a season where, as much as there is that's interesting to talk about, it starts usually with how are you, and because there's a lot going on in our lives that are personal as well as professional. So I want to start by just saying, what's the last 3-4 weeks been like for you guys as leaders in this space? What's the last month been like for you? Amy, can you start, and then we'll just jump around?
Yeah, I'd say it's been up and down. All of a sudden you find yourself in a situation that you couldn't have prepared for, really, and having to make some pretty dramatic decisions on the fly that require a whole lot of maneuvering and coordinating and shifting of people's responsibilities. And I think for the first couple of weeks, it was just like you just jump in and you just go and you make it happen. And I think for me, it was about 2.5 weeks into that where I started recognizing I better check in with myself, because I don't know if I'm feeling as solid as I'd like to be feeling. And kind of felt like I hit my wall, at about 2.5 weeks in, and had to kind of pause and reorient myself and then kind of jump back in to things. So I think for me, for the most part, I feel today I'm doing great, but it definitely has been a little up and down.
Could you give an example too, when you say dramatic decisions? I don't know if there's somebody you can share or not, but could you give an example of the kinds of things you're having to?
Yeah, so we're a housing program. So our families we're an old hotel, and the hotel rooms have been converted into apartments. So currently we have 20 families that are living on site with us. But we're not just housing, we're also a program. So our families participate in all kinds of programming as a requirement of being in our program. And so that could be on-site counseling, it would be employment and education classes, so adult basic education classes, ESL classes, GED classes, computer labs. We have a youth program, so and counseling. I'm not sure if I said that. So there are a series of things that families were required to participate in. And then we place a big emphasis on community life. And a lot of that community life is formed by being together, right? And us providing opportunities for our families to be together in healthy spaces. And so, over a series of days, we started having to cut back on all of that. To where today, really, not much of that, none of that's happening in person. And then the biggest decision that we had to make is our families don't have kitchens in their apartments. So we have a large community kitchen that our families all access. I think as things started to get really bad, we had to make the decision to close that kitchen. And that had a pretty dramatic effect on our families. And so I think that was a little bit of a turning point for me as families started reacting, against not being able to even cook for themselves.
Yeah, thanks. Jeff, you've been walking with Amy a lot in this last few weeks. How has it been for you?
Yeah, it's actually been a gift to watch Amy lead in that setting and to be really human as a leader, and to be a non-anxious presence, which I think is really, really important in this time, but also to be honest with her own pain, and that she leads as a human being. And so some of this is joyful and some of it's really, really painful, and it's part of the responsibility of leadership when we have to make decisions that are hurtful to other people in some way, and will make people angry or deeply disappointed. So Amy's just done a really good job with that. And I guess if the question is how am I, I'm well. I'm very well, and I'm very conscious of just with our families at Joshua Station. Most of them have lost the jobs they had. They had low-paying jobs. They've pretty much lost those jobs. They're living in very small spaces. They're living in spaces not a heck of a lot bigger than the little camper I'm sitting in now. I mean, bigger than that, but not awful lot, and with their families. And so, and then, I'm healthy and my loved ones are healthy, and I'm aware some of our friends and loved ones are not. I'm aware, for example, that a pastor in our city that we work together with on some things, Terrence Hughes, is very ill with the virus and really fighting for his life. And so I'm well, and deeply concerned about all the people who are struggling in such big ways around us.
Yeah. Sarah, how about you?
Well, Amy was saying earlier that, it's a little up and a little down. And I feel like I'm a lot up and I'm a lot down every hour of every day and night. So maybe I'm going to channel in some of your calmness, Amy. Like Jeff was saying, that you've been a calm presence, and I'm a very excitable person in general. I get really excited about things. I get really angry about things. I get really sad about things. And so I truly do feel like I am going through all of the stages of grief almost every day. And I didn't realize that until, one day I was very, very sad. And then the next day I woke up like very angry. And then I just Googled, because I haven't really done too much research on the stages of grief. But as I started reading through it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what's happening. And I am self-quarantined in my apartment. And so I am an introvert. So thankfully, I'm not craving tons of human interaction except for my family, and they live really close, and it's really hard to be so close and yet know that the best thing for our entire world is to stay put if I have the privilege. And so at times of the day, I feel so thankful for the privilege that I have to work from home, to be here safe with all the food I need. I mean, I'm comfortable. And then also realizing that a lot of, I mean, our friends right now that are locked up in the immigrant detention center are the complete opposite of that scale of having no privileges, no rights. And you know, I was talking to someone yesterday. There's so many resources available to us now as nonprofit leaders and as just human beings that we didn't get a few weeks ago. I mean, they've got classes from Yale that you can attend for free. You know, there's so many things that are now available to us. And I was talking with another nonprofit leader yesterday at a webinar, and what they thought maybe I'm struggling with a little bit is sort of this like survivor's guilt, you know? And even just hearing that a little bit helped me feel a little more on solid ground, because finally there was like a term to describe how I'm feeling. Like, how can I sit here at my table and have a delicious dinner, and I know that 15 minutes away there are hundreds of men and women who are literally locked in their cell 23 hours a day with nothing to do, and they're in a prison condition where either they have been exposed to it or they very soon will be exposed to it, and they are just sitting there with, I mean, I don't know how many of y'all know someone, maybe specifically an asylum seeker, who has come to the United States for safety, but they didn't come here because they had a fabulous life back home. Asylum seekers are fleeing torture and death and persecution. And so now they're left in their cell alone with that. And it's really an interesting time to be thankful for what you have. And also, as a leader, this has definitely brought up a little bit more righteous anger, that when we're allowed to really go back full impact, I've got a lot of energy, you know, to make this world a better place for everyone, right? Like, because we're seeing right now our decisions are impacting the most vulnerable communities the most, and I don't want that to be our legacy.
Unmute. Lewis, what are the last couple weeks been like for you? How are you doing?
Yeah, I can relate to everything that everybody has said. Definitely count myself and my family fortunate to not be in a position where our life has been changed dramatically. But I also recognize that that's rare, and there's not a lot of people in that position. And we are called to use the privileges that are afforded to us to work on behalf of others. So I think, like everyone else who's spoken has said, our work is already geared toward leaning into these spaces, and so I think we're all focusing on leaning harder and heavier. Maybe to talk about something that we haven't talked about yet. My wife and I have 4 small kids, 14, 12, 6, and 4, at all different levels of education. And I'm, conscientious of what a lot of families are feeling right now too, who they have their kids at home with them. They could be single parents or co-parenting, and they're trying to figure out how to handle all that, manage that, while still trying to earn a living. And so, spend a lot of time, thinking, sitting in meetings, and I'm, like I said, I'm really fortunate. Part of my work is remote. I work from home, so I'm used to this personally. So I'm trying to spend a lot of time thinking about others. I will say this: as heartbroken as I am about what's going on around the world, for a lot of people, I am also encouraged, because I recognize that systemically, the things that we're talking about for immigrants, asylum seekers, for people who are involved in the justice system, for people experiencing homelessness, food insecurity, for young students or adult students who are living paycheck to paycheck, and then for average middle class families. Uh, the reality is some of these systemic barriers and issues are entrenched and they are centuries old. And it's very difficult, as passionate as we are and as creative as we are, for us to change that in our lifetime. A situation like what we're looking at right now puts it front and center. And so I'm excited about the way that industry, workforce, education, and then specifically in other countries in the world are leaning into these issues and leveraging this moment to change things for everyone, but specifically the most marginalized.
Louis, you and I had a conversation the other night. You were driving through a rest, picking up food. I was in back getting, I think, the grill going, and we were talking. And you said, or I said, I'd been talking with a leader from a university who was saying that this is a tipping point in higher education. And he said, now there's this moment where I think he said there's going to be some schools that are going to close. He works at a Christian institution. He said there's going to be some Christian institutions that might close during this time, which seemed like, man, I didn't realize higher education was in that much of a tension right now. But this online, all of a sudden, the access to this changes stuff. I said, there may be some that close, and you said, yep, and it might be a good thing. Can you say why that is, or what's the, you weren't speaking against I don't think, the badness of that education, but you're saying it was an equity question for you, I think.
Yeah, I'll try to do this as quickly as possible. So CALE is a membership organization. The company I work for now is a membership organization, and we have like 600 plus institutions across the country who partner with us to understand the future of education as it relates to specifically non-traditional learners. So people who are not 18, fresh out of high school, parents have money in the bank, they're ready to go to college. We're talking about young parents, people who are taking care of sick and aging adults, adults who are going back with kids, all these non-traditional students. Those schools are regularly on this treadmill of trying to figure out how do we manage enrollment and retention in a way that keeps us relevant and keeps our doors open. Up until the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of pressure on institutions, on higher education, to continue to grow enrollment. There are, we are noticing people are not going to school at the same rate as they were before. Debt is over people's heads. They're buried in debt. And then industry is saying, after you spend all that time in college and you graduate, your degree is not always useful because you spent 4 years learning how to learn something that somebody taught you, when in actuality, our industry has changed dramatically over the past 4 years. So are you ready to do what we need you to do now? But since COVID-19, it's accelerated because you got a lot of people who are basically saying, I cannot afford to go to school. And these are people who typically are going to school. They either are used to filling out the FAFSA, getting Pell Grants, getting loans, or their family has money. Those people are starting to say, you know what, I got to make a decision right now. I got to earn some money. I physically can't be on site, etc. Then you have institutions who, some of them have been dragging their feet. A lot have come along, but their online learning platforms and their online learning programs are lagging. And overnight, thousands of institutions had to stand up, learn online learning for their entire student base, not just for the adult student program, but for everybody. Um, and then you have underserved and marginalized students who were already having a hard time choosing school. The reason why I think it could be a good thing is higher education is an institution that's steeped in privilege. It's a system that's steeped in privilege anyway, um, specifically, public and private schools. maybe not the community college system, but four-year institutions, meaning that people go to college who are used to seeing other people go to college. So when you grow up in families and communities where college is kind of out of reach, you're the first in your family, the first in your community, you're kind of a, you're a rare bird, you're special. Um, and I don't think that should be the case for people. And so I think it could be really a wonderful opportunity for institutions, specifically institutions, to rethink education, to rethink recruitment and enrollment, and then the relevance of what they're offering to people, not only in light of where they end up after they graduate, but what situations they're coming out of, so that when our economy and our world is shook like this again, they don't lose all their students. And to me, I think if you do a good job of serving and building for the most marginalized, it's easier to hit everybody else in between. So I'm excited about the opportunity to come out of this, even though it's going to be very painful for a lot of people who are dependent on higher education.
It's a really interesting space that you work in, Louis. It's taken me a few years to catch up with understanding it, but the way that you're bringing and intentional about workforce planning and training and development in different cities around the country and preparing people, and particularly people that usually don't have access. It's really important work and really interesting space. I wonder, Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about the immigrant community right now, maybe some of the releases that are coming up, or just kind of what's happening in that space that maybe people should be aware of that they may not know about?
Yeah, so I started Casa de Paz 8 years ago, and it's taken all of those 8 years to come up with a really good post-release support process. So what happens oftentimes is an asylum seeker will come to the United States to request asylum, which is basically their way, the legal way to ask for safety from your own government, because it's too dangerous for you to stay home. And you cannot ask for asylum from Cameroon, Africa, or from Bangladesh, or from Guatemala. You physically have to come to the United States, and your feet have to be on the ground of the United States. So asylum seekers arrive at the border. They voluntarily turn themselves in to a Border Patrol agent saying, here's my story. This is why it's too dangerous for me to go home, and I'm requesting asylum. And so it's a human right that's recognized by the entire world, that you can at least ask for asylum. Whether or not you win or you don't win, I mean, that's up to the judge, but you can at least ask. So what happens is asylum seekers recently arriving to the United States are oftentimes put into these immigrant detention centers where they're waiting for the judge to make a determination on their case, whether they win their case and can stay in the United States, or whether they lost their case and then they're deported back to their home country. And so here in Aurora, right off of I-70 and Peoria, there's a for-profit immigrant detention center. And so there are right now, about 500 or 600 men and women, both asylum seekers who just recently came to the United States, and also undocumented immigrants who had been living here for maybe 5, 10, 20 years that had got arrested by ICE, and now they're in detention. So they're not serving a sentence for any crime committed, they're just being held indefinitely. Now, on the good day where an asylum seeker or an immigrant wins their case, or the judge gives them a bond and their family pays their bond, you know, it's a day of celebration. Congratulations, you're free. Okay, what if you've never been to Denver before? What if you were transferred here from the border after requesting asylum, and your family lives in Florida, or they live in Wisconsin, or your sponsors live in Oregon? How do you get to your final destination? You're released through the back door of the immigrant detention center with, most of the time, no phone, no money, you may not speak any English, and you are wandering in a completely foreign country. And so our volunteers go to the detention center Monday through Friday and pick up immigrants who've been released and then take them to Casa de Paz, which means House of Peace. And then we help them figure out their logistics, their travel logistics, so they can get home to their families. So we've never in the 8 years ever seen any kind of mass release from immigrant detention, especially in the middle of a pandemic, right? Like, never in a million years would I have ever thought that we would see this day. But a couple days ago, or a couple weeks ago, on one day, 12 women were released on humanitarian parole, meaning that their case hadn't been decided by the judge yet, but because being in a prison right now is so dangerous, not only because you don't have access to good medical care, but you're also confined in a really small space with people who are exhibiting symptoms. So there are a lot of really amazing groups and individuals who are working really hard to get as many immigrants out of detention right now as possible, because it is a very unsafe place to be. So 2 weeks ago, we saw 12 women released on one day, and then the following day we had 16 men get out. And those are really big numbers for us. We typically will see maybe 2 or 3 or 4, on a busy day, we would see 5 immigrants released. And so we kind of had to shift the way that we do things, because before, our volunteers would go and pick up someone who's released and greet them with a big hug. Well, we can't get within 6 feet now, right, of anyone. We're wearing masks and gloves, and how do you explain to a newly arrived immigrant that the person who's there to greet you is now like, no, stay away, So we've had to think through a lot of things in a very short amount of time. I'll give you an example. We got the word that the women would be released on Wednesday night, I think around 6 or 7 o'clock. And within a couple of hours, we had a plan in place to send volunteers there the following day and just be ready to receive them. But then the main host family that lives at Casa, one of the family members had cancer last year, and so it's just too dangerous to bring anyone over to the home anymore. So now we have to figure out, how do we get the accommodations for our guests, backpacks, food, clothing, whatever it is that they need. And then how do we safely get someone released from detention on a flight to get home to their families, when traveling by air is one of the most dangerous things you can do right now. And so what I'm really thankful for is having a family of volunteers that not only do post-release support, but really care about it, because they're thinking through all of the little things that will have implications, not only for the volunteers, but for the folks being released from detention. And that took years of cultivating volunteers and appreciating them, and for them to feel their purpose, to be able to, and my mom says it really well. She said that she believes it was sort of a miraculous covering from God to give us the clarity and the wisdom as a team to change everything almost overnight, and for it to work out, and still at the same time you're left, like Amy, you were saying, and Jeff, you were mentioning earlier, really, really, really difficult decisions. ICE ultimately suspended all social visits in person at the detention center. But a couple of days before that, I made the decision as the leader of Casa de Paz that we would stop doing in-person visits, because the risk of us bringing the virus to the detention center was really high. But then you think through the reality that we have a visitation program where we visit immigrants who are locked up and they don't have family here, where their only connection to the outside world. And then you are left with this decision of, do you stop going to visit folks in prison and then cut out their source of connection. And that's not a fun decision to have to make. So, you know, I made the decision, and then 2 days later, ICE ended up, you know, suspending the visits. So it took a little bit of the pressure off of me. But these decisions are, for a lot of folks, you know, life and death. And I don't know if I'm doing the right thing most of the time. And I think that's part of some of the PTSD that leaders are going to be experiencing is, did I make that right decision? If I had done it this way, could it have been different?
I remember we were in New Orleans after Katrina, and I just remember feeling so much like there's no path. Like, okay, we've got to figure out what to do in this space. There's no obvious. And then wondering, is this the right one? Are we hitting the right, all that stuff? I wonder, Jeff and Amy, for folks experiencing homelessness right now in Denver, for other communities that you're in touch with, what should we know about what's happening there?
Well, I wanted to respond to the last thing that Sarah said.
Yeah.
And I think that Sarah just said one of the most important things I think about leadership all the time, at least in my experience, not just once in a lifetime pandemic situation. And that is, most of the time, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. You know, and I suppose some people do, but I often feel like I'm just faking it. The critical thing to me is I don't think I know what's the right thing to do, but, you know, so then it's all about who you are, the person you are, the character you've developed, the practices you've developed, the intuitions you've developed by putting yourself in the place to be shaped and formed into the person that this situation requires, and then being authentic to yourself. Sarah, you're really good at that, and it's one of the reasons that Casa de Paz is such a gem for our city, is because you lead out of who you are and that passion and the compassion that you have. So I'm really grateful for that. It's not because we have the answers, for sure. It's not because of competence. It's really just out of putting ourselves in the place that God wants us to be. I also think it's about surrounding ourselves with good people. I don't, most of the time, don't know what to do. So I heard Dave Runyon, one of our leaders in Denver, say yesterday, I thought this was really good. He said, I think it's really important for leaders to put off making decisions as long as they can. In other words, sometimes we think that leaders need to be really, can't think of what the word is, but like where you just know right what to do and you make a decision quick and implement it. What's the word I'm looking for there?
Responsive?
Decisive.
Decisive. Yeah, maybe that's it. And Dave was saying, I actually don't think so. I think the best leaders, he said it this way, the best leaders slow everything down. Just slow everything down. And then if you're surrounded by good people, the right answers will rise up within your organization, just out of the community that you've cultivated, if you slow things down and allow the answers to rise. But if we're functioning all alone, then, you know, sometimes in a crisis, maybe we can't do that, I acknowledge, but in general. So I just, you know, because we care about leadership and because iSSACHAR is about leadership, I just wanted to respond to that really critical point, Sarah.
Yeah.
And it's hard for leaders to admit that they don't know what they're doing a lot of the time, but the truth is most of us are faking it most of the time.
Speaking of, I think I just messed up the Zoom thing because somebody asked a question and I was trying to figure it out and I didn't know what I was doing and I clicked something and now the answer's gone, or the question is gone. But hopefully
it'll come back.
Okay, sorry, Barbara.
Anthony will.
Yeah, I'm grabbing all the questions and all that stuff, so don't worry about that. I'll compile them all and then I'll ask you all at about 15 minutes.
I just
And then
wanted
if
to
I
show you
could-
a real life example of a leader who knows what she's
Thank
doing.
you.
If I could say one more thing on the homeless piece, because you asked about that, Scott. You know, Amy will speak about the families at Joshua Station, where we serve a very particular slice of the homeless community, and that's homeless families. But, you know, if you're paying attention to what's going on in Denver at all, you know that Denver's really wrestling and struggling with what to do about people who are living outside now. And the city and the state are trying to get on the same page about this. Decisions have just been made, even today and in the last 24 hours, about opening up a site at the National Western Stock Show. They're trying to get hotel owners to open up sites for unhoused people, but that's not going very well from what I understand. So I'm really grateful, though, for some really good leaders in our city who are trying to figure it out, and they are having to be decisive. They don't have the luxury of slowing things down. They're having to move very quickly. So anyway, I'm glad that they're working really hard on that, and it's a high tension, high stress setting that they're in.
I was just gonna respond to a couple things. Sarah, you were talking about like when you making that decision to not do visitations anymore and the implications of that. And I think for the populations that we work with, vulnerable people, I think anytime you have to make some of those hard decisions that affect the few positive things that they might have going in their lives, right? That it really does have significant consequences in their lives. So closing the kitchen, I don't cook. So when I was thinking about closing the kitchen, I was like, oh, no big deal. They've got microwaves in their apartments. They can like figure this out. But it was a huge deal to some of our families because they're finally in a situation where they have a kitchen, right? And they can provide for their family. And then all of a sudden we say, nope, sorry, you can't do that. And I just think when you're working with vulnerable people and you have to make those kinds of decisions, the implications are significant. I also was thinking about, I feel like our current families at Joshua Station, most of who had jobs have lost their jobs. They're going to be okay because they're at Joshua Station, right? So we're going to work with them. We're going to do what we need to do to take care of them. I think a lot about, we had 4 families who recently just completed the program at Joshua Station. So they'd lived there for over 2 years. They completed all the requirements of the program. They've remained clean and sober for those 2 years and just moved out of Joshua Station. One family in particular just moved out, moved into an apartment, a market rate apartment. Had worked so hard to get to that point where they were able to afford that apartment. And then literally in a matter of weeks after moving out, lost their job because of coronavirus, and now find themselves with this market rate lease hanging over their head and not the same ability to afford it. And this particular person has a significant history of substance abuse. So the amount of stress that now this person is having to kind of hold, I'm super concerned about the potential of her relapsing and then that kind of starting, a whole nother cycle for her. Yeah, I don't know. There's just so many ramifications to all of this that can just feel so overwhelming as you begin to think about individual people and individual cases, families that we've worked with, and how this is going to affect their lives.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. We've got about 10 minutes until we're howling, it sounds like. And so in those 10
Amy's
minutes,
dog Bentley has already gotten started.
It's already starting. what I want to ask, just what, I don't know, what counsel, what thoughts, what are you thinking about? What are you following? Who have you heard? What, in terms of as followers of Jesus and as leaders, is there anything that you're thinking about right now, or the ways that you're approaching things, or any counsel or advice, or anything to pass on? It feels like a good season to be learning from each other and listening to each other. And anybody can jump in. We got a couple minutes for each of you.
What's interesting for me personally is before the coronavirus sort of hit hard here in the US, I was already in a season of learning to trust God more than ever before in my life, and finding a deep peace that all will be well. Maybe not right now or 5 years or 10 years, but when I die and I'm hopefully going to heaven, that is where my peace, my full peace will be found. And that thought soothes me. And I struggle with anxiety, and a couple weeks ago I told my mom, at one part of the night I thought I was having a heart attack and I had to like press on my chest, and I was very scared. And I'm constantly reminding myself that we were not created for this world. We were created for we're here in this world, and yes, we were created to be in this world, but we're also spiritual beings, and we have eternity to look forward to. And I know that sounds sort of, when I hear people normally talking like that, I'm like, okay, but like for me right now, it's real. It's more real than I've ever felt in my life. And I'm like, thanks God, like couldn't have learned this a different way, but apparently not.
Yeah, thanks.
Louis,
I guess I'll go.
you go.
um, yeah, I think that there's a real difficult balance that Christian leaders have to live in, where we have to be very closely connected to and in touch with the pain of each individual that we serve. The organizations that we've been talking about, we're talking about individuals. We're not talking about, you know, thousands of lives or national trends. We're talking about individual people. And we have to show empathy, a deep level of understanding in relationship to the pain that they're experiencing, in a way that it motivates us to move. And then we have to be able to articulate that and bring people into the effort with us, while at the same time we can't be overwhelmed by their pain. And I think it's really important for us, in this moment, to have a healthy balance of outlet and other leaders that we can cry with and talk with and confess concerns and fear, pray with, and then at the same time be able to go back into the spaces where we lead and do it with optimism, with hope, with strategy, and with intention. Um, and I think that there's power in vulnerability as a leader. And so people are looking for authentic leadership, for individuals who can live what they say and cry with them. And then there's a time where they need people to step up and help them get it done. And so I think we have to find a way to do that right now, in a way and in a time where these things are impacting even us, in new ways. I was in the middle of a group at Lookout Mountain. I do music therapy services for incarcerated youth here in Colorado. And I was in the middle of a group at Lookout Mountain. It got canceled. And, I had just connected life on life with these kids, really getting to know them and where they were headed. And now they're not allowed to have visitors. And that really ticks me off. Like I want to be there. I want to learn from them and share with them, and I can't do it. But I also have to recognize their need for safety and protection. So how do I not swing too far in either direction and choose my moments? So I would just, one thing that I'm personally trying to do for myself is find those outlets to pour and also be filled, take care of myself. Because if our leaders aren't taking care of ourselves, it's going to be hard for everybody else to do the same. They're going to do what we're doing. And and when I'm struggling, have people I can be honest with that about, so I can get bandaged up and get back into the fight, because this thing is real. Um, yeah.
Thanks, Louis.
I'll give it a go here and see if my dogs will stay quiet. And Jeff, you may say more about this, but at Mile High during the season of Lent, we've been practicing a prayer together. And as I was listening to both Sarah and Louis, somehow I think it fits with what you were saying, Sarah, in that belief that all will be well. I think this prayer that we do together as a community is also recognizing that right here, right now, all is well, despite it all being a shit show. Excuse me. And our practice, as we've done, is really trying to hold on to that sense of, I think, God's the same God he was before the coronavirus came, right? And our sense of wellness is rooted much deeper than some virus, right? And I think for me, Louis, I think in what you were saying too, just about the state of higher education and maybe some schools not surviving this and that maybe being okay. That there is perhaps a silver lining under all of this for each of us. For each of us as individuals, for each of us as organizations, for larger institutions. Like, what is the gift that's being presented to us at this moment? So the prayer that we pray together, it's called the welcoming prayer. And Jeff, I'm just gonna, is it okay if I just read it real quick?
Please. Yeah.
It's not very long. And I think it would be interesting to just pay attention to your reaction to this prayer, because it's a hard prayer and you may disagree with it entirely. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome everything that comes to me in this moment, because I know it is for my healing. I welcome all thoughts, feelings, emotions, persons, situations, and conditions. I let go of my desire for security. I let go of my desire for approval. I let go of my desire for control. And I let go of my desire to change any person, situation, condition, or myself. And I open to the love and presence of God and the healing action and grace within. So, what a challenge, I think, at this moment in time, to be able to have a sense of there's beauty in this somewhere, somehow for us, because I trust that it is all for my own healing. It's all for the world's healing. So,
Yeah.
question that has been the thing that has sustained me and kept me rooted and grounded in a sense of God's presence.
I just want to react to your prayer, Amy. I agree 100%. And this is my opinion. Um, I don't really think the lining is just silver. I really think like the whole horizon. If we're following the metaphor, I think daybreak is actually pretty beautiful because again, um, when we're talking about really deep and difficult things to change, especially when they require that we sacrifice. Um, there's a preacher friend we used to have who would say, sacrifice isn't sacrificing until you have to sacrifice. And we always say, praying for patience and praying for the needy. Um, there's no way that these things are going to change unless we all give up, not only a little, but a lot. And so we're in a position where we're having to do that. And again, for kingdom minded folks, system change folks, people who are motivated by impact, I think the horizon is bright if we get to work and spend this time not being so focused on how it's hurting us and making us uncomfortable, but brainstorming, co designing, co creating, testing things out, talking and listening, and working in an agile and quick way to be able to be ready to respond, thinking ahead, thinking about what's coming out of this, what needs are going to be presented. Um, I think it's actually a wonderful opportunity.
Jeff, we're coming to you right at howling time. Is this the time?
Can you hear? I don't know if you can hear it through my speakers, but my neighbors are all out howling.
What is that? Why are they howling? Because of the moon?
Well, it is a full moon tonight, biggest full moon of the year, but
Oh, that's a trip, man.
it's just a thing that started all across the country, and
We started here in Denver.
did it really?
It's intended to be a thank you to healthcare workers and those people
Oh,
on the line, but I think it's just turned into a community collaborative
that's cool.
of engaging and connecting in a time when we can't really do that.
That's really cool.
And it's just silly, but I think that's actually a gift. I think we need in these times some ways to just let off steam too. And it's cool that we can all do it together. It's a common language. Everybody can howl.
Great. Yeah, you can hear it. You hear it all out there.
It's good.
Well, yeah, I'm one of our staff, Sierra, at this last staff meeting, brought us back to the doxology at Jude, to Him who's able to keep us from falling or to keep us from stumbling, and to present us before His glorious presence without fault and with great joy. Be all praise. And thanks to y'all for sharing, for jumping in. Anthony, I'm going to hand it back to you. I think you've been tracking the questions and you can lead us through that.
Awesome. So yes, time for Q&A. So I'm just going to jump right in for the sake of time. So our first question is from Madison Duke, who's one of our apprentices. And she asked, for anybody on the panel, what are the benefits from this virus, the stay-at-home order, or are there benefits at all in your opinions?
I'll go really quickly. Yeah, I love the fact that I'm getting to be with my family. I don't always get to do that. And so even when I actually need to go out and do something and it's kind of a pain to not be able to do that, it's cool to be able to be with my family. The other benefit, I think, systemically is typically employers and industry and opportunity don't come to those who aren't first on the list unless they have to come. So I'm really interested to see when this is over, the kind of opportunities that will be presented for work for new Americans, justice involved people, people who usually aren't like on the first few rungs. They're not, the cream of the crop for those industries. I'm excited about the opportunity. And then the way that the focus on the frontline worker, we always hear about our heroes being, people who are involved in law enforcement and military. I personally believe that those who are involved in education, who work in hospitals, who are paramedics. I also believe pastors and community workers are frontline workers and heroes as well. So I'm excited about how like people who bag groceries at Walmart's are they're getting love right now, and I hope that that sustains, and I think that that's a benefit of this.
For us at Casa de Paz, we've had to sort of go back to the basics and do what we did when we first started, which was very, very simple and very, very focused on our mission to provide hospitality for immigrants released from detention. And I think through the years, as our community of volunteers has grown, we're all volunteers, we don't have any paid staff. We've had so many volunteers that I've sort of just started creating new programs and new volunteer teams, and sort of felt a little bit pulled in a lot of different directions. And I'm realizing through this, one of the benefits is, instead of doing 10 things okay, like, what's the one thing that God wants us to do extremely well? And that's what I can say is a positive for the CASA. And for me personally, I'm loving wearing my pajamas all day. This is like the best. So I'm really, that's something that is a positive for me, that I don't have to change out of my pajamas.
Yeah, I think you've probably heard people use the phrase recently, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. There are opportunities that come with crises, and they force us to rethink what we're doing and how we're doing things. And I can already sense some of that coming from Mile High Ministries, some ways that we're going to be either invited or forced to reconsider and rethink some things. But I think that's happening at the family level, where families are of necessity spending more time together. Sometimes it's really difficult, and sometimes it's a blessing for people. I think it can happen at our organizational levels as well, as we're invited to rethink things. So an example I'm thinking about, that I was talking with another community leader just this not too long before this call. You know, we're all concerned about people who are unhoused and who are living outside, living in tents. We see the tents all over our city where people are living. And one of the things that we've been wondering about is, why isn't there a sanctioned place where people can camp? So it seems that some people are determined, for whatever reason in their own life, to sleep outdoors. They don't want to be in a shelter or in an institutional setting. And yet, you know, probably none of us think it's optimal for them to be camping in various places next to businesses or next to private homes. But there's no sanctioned place for people to camp. So maybe this will be a crisis that will force us to think that through and create, you know, a place where they can live in the way that they want to live, but that in a way that works for the entire community. That's just an example of how a crisis forces us into new ways of thinking. One of the things we're seeing at Mile High Ministries is that just in order to not feel so disjointed and disconnected from one another, we've been having a staff gathering every day via Zoom. And when we first started, we thought it would be 15 minutes because it's hard to get people to come to meetings, you know. But that meeting goes an hour every day, and it's not because we're forcing people to stay. It's because when we're alone, we're eager for that human connection, even if it's over the computer screen. And so we pray the prayer that Amy read earlier, and then we do something called the Be Still prayer, based on 146th Psalm, be still and know that I am God. I think that's the right psalm. And then we sit in silence together. So it's amazing. We get on the computer just to look at each other's faces and then sit in silence for 5 minutes together. And I think something's going to come out of that, a more regular practice in our community life. So yeah, so I think Madison's question, there's a lot of good things that will come out of this very bad situation?
I would just say people have different opportunities to lean on different gifts. And that may be true for our workers, it's true for our families. I think that's true for all of us. And so I think as a leader, I'm having to lean on different gifts, and I'm having to encourage or challenge my team to lean on different gifts. And it's been interesting to see who's rising, who's stepping up in different ways that maybe wouldn't be stepping up otherwise. And so I think what everyone said, there's just new opportunities. It's a chance to kind of reorient who we are as an organization and who we're going to be moving forward. Because what does this mean moving forward? And I think Jeff and I live a lot in that space of, wow, how is this going to long-term affect who we are?
I saw something, I don't know if it was a couple weeks ago or recent, it's all sort of a blur, but the pollution levels, you know, in spaces that are sheltering in place are drastically dropping. And for me, that was also a really positive that's coming from this, that I am seeing ways that I can live a more simple life moving forward. Taking public transportation more often, actually recycling, you know, buying things that don't come in one-time plastic containers, you know. So there are very practical changes that I hope stick with us. You know, I don't want to like you were saying, Jeff, I don't want this to go to waste. Like, it's too painful for us not to learn a lesson from this.
Yeah, that's well said.
Absolutely. Our next question was from Barb. I think that she might have had to leave, but I think it's a good question and a lot of people will be curious. Sarah, it's for you specifically, and just how can we support your organization? I know you talked a little bit about the pickup, but what are other things people can do now and when things are a little more normal?
Yeah, so we have tons of ways to volunteer normally and even now. And we have remote volunteer opportunities, and we also have on-site volunteer opportunities where you can pick up someone from the detention center and get them to the airport and help them make plans to get home. We have folks that bring food for our guests every night, folks that bring fruit. They don't get fresh fruit in detention, so we give them healthy foods. You can write someone a letter who is in a detention center. You can make masks. So when our guests are released from detention and we put them on the plane, they've got protective equipment. You can donate your frequent flyer miles. We partner with an organization called Miles for Migrants, and you can donate frequent flyer miles so that, Lord willing, when there is another mass release from detention and 100 people get out, we can get them all flights. They don't have to pay for it. We can get them a flight through Miles for Migrants. So our website is casadepazcolorado.org. And at the very top, there's a banner that says, yes, we're still open. We're still operating, and click here. And there's all different ways for you to get involved, remote from home, or if you are out in the community, you know, you can also be out.
Awesome. So everybody that is watching right now, if you scroll to the top of the chat, you can find Sarah's website right there. And thank you so much, Sarah. That's super helpful. Our next.
I just want to say that question came from Barbara Bonner. I just saw it on there, and she had to drop off right at 8 o'clock. She's my neighbor, so I suspect she was the one out there doing all that howling.
That's why she had to leave. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it now. Okay, so our next question comes from Kevin Taylor. Hey, Kevin. Kevin says, how do you as Christian leaders balance the truth that all is well in the sense of peace that accompanies this truth with the sense that all is not well, which is accompanied by anger, holy discontent that leads us to work on the behalf of others, including those who live on the margins? And if you need me to read that again, let me know.
That's a good question. It's a good question. I thought of it when at the start of our conversation, Sarah identified her own, I don't know if you use the word anger, Sarah, but maybe passion or,
Yeah, we can
maybe,
say anger.
yeah, good.
Righteous anger.
And I
to
thought,
be
and
Christian.
righteous anger, of course, only. But I thought we wouldn't want to do anything to take away that anger because it's bearing fruit on behalf of vulnerable people. But I think the thing is that for all of us here, I know each of you well enough to know that we carry a deeper truth. And I think, Sarah, you were speaking to this earlier, and each of you have, and that the deepest truth, not just about the six of us here, but about everything and everyone, the deepest truth is our connection to God, that we are in God and that we are loved by God. That's the deepest and truest truth. So, Kevin, I think your question started with how. How do you hold that? How can you balance it? I don't know any other way than to do everything that you know how to do to cultivate your own awareness of that deeper truth. That probably means all the things that we know to do, which are all at the root some form of prayer, right? Some form of pausing in our life to intentionally be aware of the connection. I almost said cultivate the connection, but I just think the connection is. The truth is it's not that we have to get connected to God. We are connected to God. But we need to pause to cultivate our awareness of that connection. And that's how I think we can do that. And still be angry. And because I'm angry about some stuff. I mean, I'm very angry about some things that are just not right in our country. And but it's not the deepest truth about me.
I was in therapy today. I've upped my therapy sessions with my therapist since all this started going down. And I told her that I'm more, I believe people are good, like I do. But in this moment right now, in this period, like I'm seeing a lot of selfish behavior and I'm outraged. And I told that to my therapist and I said, this is sort of reminding me that we're selfish people. And then she said, yeah, without a transformation in our lives, like it's so easy for us to be self-centered, egotistical human beings. And for me personally, I'm so thankful that God has transformed my life. And I believe it's a miraculous thing. I didn't do anything to have my eyes sort of open to the immigrant detention world. That was God's transformation in my life. And I believe it more now than ever before. And it's made me so, I want to keep living this way. And I want others to live this way because I don't want to lose faith in humanity. I mean, Anne Frank went through the worst experience that I can imagine, and she still believed in the goodness of people, and she had that transformation, I believe, and that's what I'm praying every day, for that transformation to stick with me and to stick with folks who have it, and for it to get stuck on people who maybe could get a little stuck on transformation.
Awesome. We've got two more questions. So the next question is from Elisha, one of our students, apprentices. Hey, Elisha. And he's asking, what is a good Bible verse to read to someone you know who has the virus? That's a big question on the spot. So if you can't think of it, we'll figure out a way to get it to me, and then I'll get it to him. But if you can't think of it on the spot.
Jeff, can you do the prayer that you led us in a few days ago?
Yeah. Yeah, I will. So I think it's from Psalm 146. It makes me think it's Psalm 146:10. But I might have that wrong. But it's be still and know that I am God. But the way that we pray it at Mile High, and we just learned it from others who use this, but we say, be still and know that I am God. And then we ask, the group will repeat that back. So if I'm leading, for example, I would say, be still and know that I am God. Everyone would respond by saying,
Be still and know that I am God.
right. And then we keep repeating it, drop off a word or phrase each time. So the first time is be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. And so that's the prayer we use, and then we just sit together in silence, because where it takes us is this idea that the invitation from God is for us to just be, not to do, but to be, and that our very being, whether we have the virus or whether our bodies are completely healthy, our deepest truth is our being in God. So that's the passage I would certainly want to share with somebody.
And Jeff, I have that as Psalms 46:10. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I just added 100 to it. So
Nice. So I just put that in the comment section for you all.
thank you.
All right, 9 minutes left, and with our last question, it's two people asked a very similar question, so I'm going to merge the two. This comes from Heather Dean, who is one of our staff members here at Issachar, and then Mike Patton, who is just a faithful friend to Issachar. So Heather says, what self-resiliency tactics do you practice as a leader, especially times of crisis and stress? So self-resiliency is the word she used. And then Mike Patton asked, let me get the right word. How do you manage your emotions, especially given the current situation? So how are you managing your emotions? What kind of tactics do you have for self-resiliency in this crisis?
I don't. Just kidding. That's not the right answer. I have been doing my best to call my family every day and do a video call so I can see their faces. Even if I don't think I have like the energy, that has been grounding for me. And then I've also joined a Monday, Wednesday, Friday meditation group where we can come together. And it's really been helpful for me, not just the meditation part, but